At the hearing over my $3.6 million trust, my family sat in the plaintiff's row, arms crossed like they owned my fate. Mom sneered. "You can't live on your own, let alone manage money." My sister said, "Just sign." Their lawyer smiled confidently, as if this hearing was just a formality to collect my assets. When the judge asked about my lawyer, I smiled and said, "I am my own attorney." The room was cold, the kind of cold that always seemed to settle in when family matters turned ugly. I could feel their eyes on me, sizing me up, measuring the distance between us, as if they already knew how this would end. I wasn't supposed to be standing here. In their eyes, I was the broken one, the incapable one. The one who had been underestimated since I was 8 years old. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of my cheap gray suit against my skin. It wasn't much, but it was all I could afford, and right now, that felt like enough. I hadn't bothered with makeup or jewelry, no attempt to smooth over the rough edges. I didn't need to be pretty today. I needed to be strong. The sound of the courtroom door, creaking open, pulled me back into the moment. The judge, an older woman with silver hair, pulled tight into a bun, entered. She took her seat at the bench with a measured calm, flipping open her file as the room stood. The bailiff called out, "All rise." I did, standing taller than I ever thought I could in front of these people. My family. The people who had spent years telling me I was too weak to make it on my own. The ones who now wanted to take everything my grandfather had left me, everything he had trusted me with. As I stood there, the quiet hum of the room seemed to grow louder, pressing in around me. My pulse hammered in my throat, each beat reminding me of the battle ahead. I glanced over at my family, Mom, Dad, sister, and the lawyer they'd hired to make sure I didn't stand a chance. They all looked so sure, so confident that I would just sign, accept their help, and hand over control. It sickened me. The judge cleared her throat and nodded toward me. "Counsel for the respondent, Hadley Bennett," she asked, her voice steady and authoritative. I stood tall, letting the weight of my decision sink in. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, but loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "I am Hadley Bennett, and I am representing myself." The gasps that followed were barely audible, but I could feel the shock ripple through the room. My family's lawyer dropped his pen, staring at me, unable to hide his surprise. Mom's jaw went slack, her eyes widening as if she had just witnessed something she couldn't process. Dad's face turned the color of ash, and my sister's smirk melted into something darker, colder. Only my little brother, Logan, lifted his head and looked me in the eye. His expression was the only one that wasn't filled with contempt. Instead, it was full of something else. Hope, maybe. Or maybe just disbelief. They thought this was going to be easy. They thought they could walk in here and take everything from me without a fight. But they had no idea what they were up against. They underestimated me, again. And this time, I wasn't backing down. This wasn't just about the trust. This was about everything they'd taken from me, my entire life. And now it was my turn to take back what was mine. I took a deep breath and glanced around the courtroom. My family, sitting across from me, looked like they had already won. They hadn't even noticed the quiet hum of the room that settled around me. But I noticed it. I could feel the weight of everything pressing in. The expectations, the judgments. and the voices that had followed me all my life. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like an outsider in my own family. I had always been different. I was 8 when they first labeled me high-functioning autism. Mom had noticed I never talked to other kids at birthday parties, that I preferred to line up my brother's Hot Wheels by color and wheel size, instead of playing with them like the other children. The doctors said I was fine, but it didn't feel like I was. It felt like I was always just a little bit too off to belong. At home, the conversations were never about me. They were always about Kendall, my perfect sister. Her latest game, her perfect report cards. I was the one who sat quietly, counting the cracks in the ceiling tiles during dinner, trying to avoid the disappointed looks that flashed across my parents' faces when I couldn't be the daughter they wanted. When Kendall came home with another trophy, or her picture appeared in the Alv Bozeman Chronically, I learned to keep my head down and disappear into the background. It was easier that way. Easier to be invisible than to risk another round of dismissal or pity. The only person who never treated me like I was broken was Grandpa Eugene. Every Friday, without fail, he'd pull up in his dusty old Ford F-250, honk twice, and I'd race out the door, backpack already packed. We'd head to his ranch, a good 32 miles from town. The truck would rattle as we drove, country music blasting on the radio. Grandpa taught me how to read grazing leases, how to spot when tenants were trying to cheat him on head counts. He gave me ledgers and made me sign each page we filled out. He always said, "The world is going to spend your whole life trying to convince you that you can't. Don't you ever believe them." Those lessons stayed with me. When Grandpa was sick, lying in the hospital bed, I would sit beside him, holding his hand, the smell of hospital antiseptic filling the air. But the last lesson he taught me was one I hadn't realized until years later. Grandpa made sure I understood the trust he set up for me. He left me everything: his ranch, his life insurance, all of it. There were no co-trustees, no oversight board, no family votes. Just me. When he passed away, it was a Tuesday. I remember the air conditioner buzzing in the background, drowning out the lawyer's voice as he read the will. The lawyer spoke quickly, detailing what Grandpa had left each of us. My sister Kendall got the vacation cabin in Big Sky, a place my parents had always dreamed of owning. They got their share too. About $420,000 in retirement accounts. But when the lawyer turned the page and read my bequest, I could feel everyone's attention snap to me. And to my granddaughter, Hadley Marie Bennett, he read, "I leave the entirety of the Eugene Brooks Irrevocable Trust, currently valued at $3.6 million, consisting of a whole life insurance policy and 1,400 acres of deeded ranch land, currently under long-term lease." The room was quiet, the only sound the hum of the air conditioner. I could feel my mother's hand tighten around my father's until her knuckles turned white. My sister Kendall's head whipped toward me, her earrings swinging with the motion. The shock in my mother's eyes quickly shifted to something colder, something calculating. I didn't understand it then, but I understood it now. The moment the lawyer finished reading, they didn't hug me, didn't congratulate me. The coldness was palpable. The betrayal hadn't even begun. In the parking lot, Kendall muttered loud enough for the receptionist to hear. Wes' grandpa felt sorry for her. I remember how her voice carried, how that cutting remark hit me like a slap. Mom shushed her quickly, but the damage had already been done. I got in my car and drove home alone, my Subaru's windows rolled up tight, radio off. I felt numb. Grandpa had given me a gift. Something most people could only dream of. But instead of feeling joy, I felt the weight of the distrust and envy from my family, settling into the pit of my stomach. I knew it wouldn't be long before they'd start trying to take it from me. It started with a text message. "We need to talk," my mom wrote. Her words clipped, her tone final. I didn't reply. I knew what they wanted. I could feel it in my bones. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. They wanted to take the trust, the one thing Grandpa had given me, and make it theirs. To make me small enough to manage, to handle, to control. But they didn't realize something. They didn't realize that this time, I wasn't going to back down. The next night, I drove to Kendall's house. Her neighborhood was pristine, the houses all with 3-car garages and fake stone facades. It looked like the kind of place where nothing was out of place, where everything was perfect. But nothing inside her house would ever feel perfect to me again. Kendall opened the door wearing yoga pants and a Patagonia fleece. She gave me a quick hug, one that felt more like a pat down than a warm embrace, and led me into the living room. The lawyer, Roger Finch, was already sitting there. His shiny loafers propped up on the leather sectional. His thick folder sat open on the coffee table, like he owned the place. My parents were in their usual positions. Dad nursing a light beer in his recliner. Mom hovering near the kitchen island, pouring wine into stemless glasses. Except for mine. She didn't offer me a glass. Instead, she slid a bottle of water across the marble. My brother, Logan, was sitting on the ottoman, earbuds in, pretending like he wasn't even there. Kendall handed me the thick stack of papers with a quick, dismissive, "Just sign it." I flipped it open. The words blurred together, but the meaning was clear. They wanted me to transfer the trust into a joint account, to make them the co-trustees, to give them voting rights. They offered me a monthly allowance of $2,500 for living expenses. All they asked in return was that I sign away everything Grandpa had given me. And the justification was printed in bold. Hadley Marie Bennett has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and the family has concerns regarding her capacity for independent financial management. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck. Kendall folded her arms and stared at me. "Just sign it, Hadley. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Mom stepped closer, her voice syrupy sweet. "Sweetie, we're only trying to protect you. You know big money can be overwhelming." I could feel my dad's gaze, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. He just took another sip from his beer, as if this was all just a formality, as if I didn't matter. I stood up, the folder still in my hand, and without a word, I walked toward the door. Nobody followed. The cool Montana night hit me as I stepped onto the porch. I heard Kendall hiss, "Let her go. She'll come crawling back when she realizes she can't do this alone." I slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing in my ears. I didn't turn back. The next few days were a blur. My phone buzzed constantly, but I couldn't bring myself to answer any of the messages. I knew what they were, texts from my parents, pleading with me to reconsider, to make everything easier. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. Not this time. Not after everything they'd done. I had a plan now. I wasn't going to sit back and let them steamroll me. I spent the next few days buried in research, reading through every page of guardianship law I could find. Montana law was clear. Guardianships were meant to protect vulnerable adults. But the law required clear and convincing evidence that someone could not manage their own affairs. And that evidence had to be something real, something substantial. Not some piece of paper with a doctor's forged signature. The more I dug, the angrier I became. My family thought they could get away with this. They thought they could strip me of everything Grandpa had worked for. But they didn't know what they were up against. Grandpa had built that trust with one purpose: to ensure I would never have to depend on anyone ever again. And now, I had to make sure they didn't succeed in tearing it away. Late one night, after a long session of poring over case, law and guardianship petitions, I came across something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't the legal documents or the definitions of incapacity that hit me hardest. It was the first email I found in a thread between Mom and Kendall. It was dated just a few days after the will reading. Just get her to sign it. Mom had written, "We'll make sure she doesn't know what's really happening." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My family wasn't just trying to control the trust. They were trying to control me. They'd been planning this all along, waiting for the right moment to make their move. The thought that they had been discussing this behind my back, that they'd been planning to take what was mine for so long, it made the betrayal even deeper. I was nothing more than a pawn to them, a tool they could manipulate to get what they wanted. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up, scrolling through every email and text I could find, each one a piece of evidence to add to my growing collection. I couldn't afford to miss anything. I had to be ready. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I wasn't going to sit at a desk pretending everything was fine when my entire life was about to be ripped apart. I knew that in order to win, I had to play their game and better. I started gathering everything I could. Copies of emails, texts, the forged psychiatric evaluation, the withdrawal records from Grandpa's account. Everything had to be in order, airtight. If they thought I was going to back down, they were wrong. By the end of the week, I had built a binder that was as thick as a phone book. I knew that it wouldn't be enough to just show up to court with it. I had to be prepared to argue, to show the judge that I wasn't some helpless woman who couldn't handle her own life. I wasn't broken. And I wasn't about to let them make me feel that way. But the deeper I got into this, the more I felt something shifting inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years: strength. I'd been playing by their rules my whole life, letting them define who I was and what I could do. But this was different. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who backed down. This time, I was going to make sure they saw me as I really was. Someone who was more than capable of taking care of myself. Someone who could fight for what was mine. And as I sat there, assembling the evidence that would eventually take down my family's scheme, I realized that I was no longer just fighting for the trust. I was fighting for myself. I didn't know what to expect when I started gathering evidence. But I knew I had to be thorough. I couldn't afford any mistakes. Each day felt like a battle against time, but I was focused. Every moment spent reading case law, referencing guardianship statutes, and collecting documentation brought me closer to the truth. My hands ached from writing, from flipping through records, from poring over every email, every text, every financial statement. But I didn't care. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to lose. The first thing I uncovered was something I hadn't expected: the psychiatric evaluation. The one that my family was using to argue that I couldn't manage my own life. It had my name on it, but the doctor's signature was off. I looked closer, reading the name of the doctor, the clinic. The more I stared at it, the more it didn't sit right. I started searching for the doctor's name online. It didn't take long to figure out that the clinic listed on the evaluation had closed down years ago. The signature was fake, and the evaluation wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. My pulse quickened as I realized the depth of the deception. It wasn't just a petty move to gain control. It was a full-on attempt to rob me of everything Grandpa had left me. But that wasn't the worst of it. The next thing I found was the financial records. The withdrawal slips. 12 separate transactions from Grandpa's savings account, totaling $180,000. Each one was signed by someone with power of attorney, but the signatures were off. They weren't Grandpa's. They were too perfect. The pressure too even, the strokes too clean. Someone had forged his name while he was in the hospital, too weak to stop them. I felt my stomach drop as I understood the implications. My family had stolen from him, and now they were trying to use me as their scapegoat. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it, not anymore. The more I uncovered, the more it fueled me. Each new discovery became a piece of the puzzle I was determined to solve. The binder I had started filling with evidence grew thicker by the day. I couldn't let this go. I wouldn't. I needed more, though. I needed someone who could verify the forgeries. Someone who could make sense of the financial discrepancies. I started making calls. Researching forensic accountants. Anyone who could help me make sense of all the tangled mess my family had left behind. It didn't take long before I found someone. Camila Ruiz, a senior auditor from work, was the perfect person. She had always been meticulous, sharp, and reliable. Even though I'd never shared much about my personal life with her. But I didn't have a choice now. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I sent her a message, outlining what I had found. She responded almost immediately, saying she could help, but I had to be discreet. She agreed to meet with me, but only in the early hours of the morning, when no one would be around. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning as I rehearsed everything I needed to say, every detail I would need to share. The next morning, I met Camila before dawn. The parking lot of our office was empty, except for a few maintenance trucks. When she slipped out of the building, her coat pulled tight around her, she looked nervous but determined. We didn't say much at first. She handed me a flash drive and whispered, "Everything from the estate file they sent us last year for tax work. I copied the POA withdrawals too. Be careful." I nodded, gripping the drive tightly. She didn't need to say more. We both knew the stakes. As I drove back to my apartment, the weight of everything settled in. I could feel the burn of exhaustion in my muscles. But there was something else too. A quiet confidence. I was doing it. I was taking control of this situation, piece by piece. Back at my apartment, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The documents opened one by one, confirming everything I had suspected. The withdrawal records. The forged signatures. I felt the anger rise in me again, sharper this time. The fight was far from over, but I had the evidence I needed. It was time to take the next step. I wasn't going to just sit by and watch them destroy everything Grandpa had built. I had to finish this. I had to win. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. The drive I got from Camila was a gold mine of information: photos of the forged withdrawal slips, scanned copies of the financial records, and most importantly, the emails. The emails confirmed everything I'd suspected. My family wasn't just trying to manipulate the trust. They were deliberately trying to cover up the theft they'd committed. And they had done it so well, I almost hadn't noticed. But now, I couldn't ignore it. The more I read, the more the anger built inside me, sharp and focused. This wasn't just a family dispute over money. This was betrayal on a scale I couldn't ignore. They had stolen from Grandpa when he was too weak to defend himself, then tried to erase their tracks. Now, they wanted to finish the job by taking everything from me. I wouldn't let that happen. I couldn't. I called Camila the next day. "I need a forensic accountant," I said. "Someone who can take a deep dive into all this. Someone who can prove that what they did was fraud." Camila didn't hesitate. She gave me the name of someone who specialized in financial crimes, a forensic accountant in Denver, who came highly recommended. I was desperate enough to pay for rush processing. The idea of waiting any longer made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about protecting the trust anymore. It was about making sure my family couldn't get away with this. With the new evidence, I started to build a case. I spent hours every day organizing the documents, sorting through the emails, and cross-referencing every detail. The emotional toll was taking its own form. My shoulders were tight with stress, and my head often throbbed from lack of sleep. But there was no time to stop. This was the only chance I had. By the time I got the forensic accountant's report back, I felt like I'd been running a marathon. But the report was worth it. The forensic accountant had done exactly what I needed. He had analyzed the bank statements, confirmed the forged signatures, and traced the fraudulent withdrawals. The final statement was clear. This is fraud. The withdrawals were unauthorized and clearly forged. The financial records are compromised. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was the kind of validation I needed. Hard evidence that would stand up in court. But there was still more to do. I needed to be prepared. I needed everything. I spent the next week meticulously organizing all of it: the forged psychiatric evaluation, the financial documents, the emails, the forensic report. I even had photos of me as a child, from my brother's graduation party, showing me wearing noise-canceling headphones. They had used these photos in their case to prove I was incapable of managing my life. But now, I had a different angle. I was the one who was capable, who could handle every challenge they threw my way. By the end of the week, I had a binder that was thicker than I ever thought I could fill. It was packed with evidence, enough to crush their claim. I wasn't just preparing for a legal battle anymore. I was preparing to expose everything they'd done, and make sure they couldn't lie their way out of it. As I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of my family's betrayal, I realized how much this had changed me. I wasn't the quiet, broken woman who had sat in the corner for years. I had become something else, someone who wasn't afraid to fight back, someone who knew what she was worth. For the first time in years, I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my right to exist as I am, without anyone telling me who I should be. I stood up and stretched, the weight of the moment settling in. I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. And I wasn't going to let them take anything from me ever again. It was time to show up and fight. The day of the hearing arrived, and I barely slept the night before. The weight of everything was pressing down on me. The knowledge that this would be the moment when it all came to a head. The evidence was in my hands, but now I had to stand before the judge and present it. I couldn't afford to mess this up. I dressed in the gray suit I had bought weeks ago, the one that had been hanging in my closet, waiting for this moment. It felt different now. The fabric that had once seemed too stiff, too professional for me, now felt like armor. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first walked into that courtroom. I had fought for my place here, and I wasn't going to back down now. When I arrived at the courthouse, I could feel the tension in the air. The lobby was quiet, but there was a palpable sense of expectation. Like everyone knew something important was about to happen. I went through security and walked to the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I had spent so much time preparing for this moment, but now that I was here, standing in front of the door, it all felt so real. The courtroom was cold, the air heavy with the hum of anticipation. The judge's bench loomed at the front, and the gallery was starting to fill up. I saw my family enter, sitting together in the plaintiff's row, their faces set in hard lines. Mom and Dad both wore their usual expressions, calculating, like they were sizing me up, wondering if this would be the day I would finally give in. Kendall was next to them, her usual smirk replaced with something colder, more calculating. The lawyer they hired, Roger Finch, sat confidently at the table, flipping through papers like he already knew the outcome. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was my moment. I couldn't let their smirks, their condescension, their belief that I was too weak to fight back control me. I was in control now. The bailiff called the court to order. "I'll rise," they said, and everyone stood as the judge entered. She was an older woman, with silver hair pulled back tightly into a bun, her face stern and unreadable. She sat at the bench, adjusting her glasses as she scanned through the file in front of her. "Counsel for the petitioners," the judge said, her voice cutting through the silence. Roger Finch stood and introduced himself smoothly, as if he had already won. The way he spoke, the way he carried himself, made me feel like I was the underdog, like I was the one who had no chance. But I wasn't backing down. When it was my turn, the judge glanced up at me, waiting for me to speak. I stood and cleared my throat, feeling the weight of the room on me. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I am Hadley Bennett, and I am representing myself." The gasps were barely audible, but I could feel them. Roger Finch dropped his pen, his eyes wide with surprise. My family's faces twisted in shock. Mom's mouth actually hung open for a second, then quickly closed. Dad went pale. Kendall's smirk faded completely, replaced by a tight, controlled expression. Only Logan, my younger brother, seemed to be paying attention, his eyes meeting mine for the briefest moment. I wasn't sure what was going through his mind, but I could see the flicker of something in his eyes, a kind of unspoken support, maybe even regret. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the weight of what I had just said sink in. I wasn't just representing myself in court. I was representing everything I had fought for, everything I had ever wanted to prove to myself. I wasn't the broken child they had always tried to make me feel like. I was stronger than they knew, and I was ready to show them just how wrong they were. The judge didn't seem surprised, but there was a slight nod of acknowledgement as she motioned for me to continue. "Very well, Miss Bennett," she said. "Proceed with your case." I opened the binder I had prepared, the binder that was full of evidence, photographs, documents, emails, and the forensic report. I wasn't just going to argue my case, I was going to present it. Piece by piece, I laid out everything they had tried to hide from the court. The forged psychiatric evaluation. The fraudulent withdrawals from Grandpa's savings account. The email threads where my family discussed how to manipulate the situation to their benefit. The silence in the room was deafening as I spoke, as I revealed the truth. I watched Roger Finch's face fall. I watched the shock on my family's faces grow, their smug confidence crumbling with every word I spoke. The weight of their betrayal hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a victim. I was in control. When I finished, I closed the binder and looked the judge in the eye. "Your Honor," I said, "I've shown you the truth. My family's actions were fraudulent, and they've tried to steal from me and from my grandfather's legacy. I ask that you deny their petition and allow me to keep control over the trust, as Grandpa intended." The judge took a moment to read through the documents I had presented. The room was quiet, the tension palpable. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, but I didn't waver. I had fought for this moment. I wasn't backing down now. Finally, the judge looked up, her eyes sharp as she addressed Roger Finch. "Mr. Finch," she said, "do your clients have any explanation for these forged documents and fraudulent withdrawals?" Roger opened his mouth, then closed it. He fumbled for words but couldn't find any. His confident posture had melted away, and in that moment, I knew I had won. The judge turned to my family. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Do you have anything to say?" Silence. No one spoke. Kendall stared at the floor, her face as pale as Dad's. Mom's lips trembled, but she couldn't muster the words. They had nothing to say. Nothing they could say. They were caught, exposed for what they were. The judge looked back at me, then gave a firm nod. "By the express terms of the interim clause, in the Eugene Brooks Irrevocable Trust," she said, "the petitioners have forfeited all beneficial interest. The petition for guardianship is denied and dismissed with prejudice. All trust assets remain solely with Miss Bennett." The words hit me like a wave, but I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel the joy I expected. What I felt was quiet, final, earned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and my family, my parents, my sister, the lawyer, sat there in stunned silence. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. I gathered my things and stood, nodding to Logan as I left the courtroom. He didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke volumes. There was something in them, something I hadn't seen in years. Maybe, just maybe, he finally understood. The sun was setting as I walked out of the courthouse. The world outside felt colder than usual, but I didn't care. Justice had been served, and I had won. The weeks following the hearing felt surreal. At first, I thought I'd feel relief, or maybe a sense of triumph, but instead, there was an unsettling quiet. My family had been exposed. Their greed laid bare in front of the court, and yet, I still couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. It was hard to shake off the heavy sense of loss that had settled in my chest. I had won, but I had lost something too. My family was fractured, irreparably so. The trust I had fought for, the future I was supposed to inherit, felt tainted by the betrayal. The first signs of the consequences came within days. It started with a letter from Wells Fargo, delivered in a thick envelope, heavy with bad news. The subject line read, "Foreclosure proceedings on the Bennett family ranch." It wasn't a surprise, not really, but the reality of it hit hard. Mom and Dad had taken out a reverse mortgage years ago, gambling on the future growth of the trust money. But when that money was no longer theirs, the bank was coming to collect. A few days after that, Kendall's husband filed for divorce. Apparently, the weight of mounting credit card debt, car loans, and the house they could no longer afford was too much for their marriage. He walked away with his truck and a clean credit score, leaving Kendall with nothing but a single bedroom rental and a part-time receptionist job. The Big Sky cabin, once their pride and joy, was sold at auction for less than the mortgage owed on it. My sister had always lived with the expectation that things would just work out for her. But the crash was coming, and now it was here. I didn't feel any joy in it, not even a sense of justice. My parents' financial ruin was a bitter pill to swallow. I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't wanted them to lose everything. I just wanted control over what was mine. Still, the fact that they had tried to steal it all, tried to rob me of the legacy Grandpa left, made their downfall seem less like karma and more like the inevitable consequence of their own greed. The worst of it came when I heard from Logan. He had dropped out of Montana State University a few weeks after the hearing. Dad had cut off the funds for his tuition, and Logan's world had come crashing down around him. I hadn't heard much from him since the will reading, but one night, my phone buzzed with a text. "Sis, I need to talk. Can we meet tomorrow?" I didn't hesitate. I agreed to meet him at a diner the next morning. It was early when I walked in, the air thick with the smell of coffee and grease. Logan was already sitting at the corner booth, his hood pulled up, his hands wrapped around a cup he wasn't drinking. His face was drawn, tired, like he hadn't been sleeping. I sat down across from him, offering a small smile, but he didn't smile back. He just looked at me, his eyes full of something: guilt, regret, fear. He slid a flash drive across the table to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this, Hadley. But I can't be a part of it anymore. I took the drive from Mom's laptop last night. They've been lying to you. I didn't know they were going to do this. I'm sorry." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't even have to ask what was on the drive. I knew. It was more evidence, more lies. I took the drive without a word, slipping it into my bag, Logan looked at me then, his eyes red, rimmed. I don't want to lose you, sis. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell him that everything would be okay, that we would get through this together. But I couldn't lie to him. We both knew that things had changed. The trust had changed everything. I wasn't the same person I used to be. Neither was he. The rest of the breakfast passed in silence. We didn't speak much after that, but we didn't need to. Logan and I both knew that this wasn't just about the trust anymore. It was about our family, about the shattered pieces of what we once were. And there was no going back. Back at my apartment, I plugged the drive into my laptop. I didn't have to look at the files for long before the truth hit me like a freight train. The emails on the drive, texts from Mom and Kendall, laid out everything in black and white. They had been planning this for months. The divorce, the manipulation, the control. It was all there, carefully documented. I hadn't just been fighting for my inheritance. I had been fighting to keep my family from tearing each other apart. And in some ways, it had already happened. I spent the rest of the day organizing the new evidence, making sure everything was in order. There was no turning back now. The case was far from over, and I knew I had to keep going. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Logan, for the parts of my family that still mattered. But as I sat there, organizing everything, I couldn't help but wonder if the damage had already been done. Would we ever be able to heal from this? Or was this the end of everything we'd once known? The phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Mom. Hadley, your father and I were wrong. We let fear and greed get the better of us. If there's any way you can find it in your heart to forgive us, we'll fix this. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. The words were empty to me, just another attempt to regain control. I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the message, just as I had every other message from them. They hadn't earned forgiveness. Not yet. I looked at the calendar on the wall. The hearing was coming up. There was still more to do, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had the truth on my side. And this time, nothing could stop me. The final day of the hearing arrived with a sense of finality I wasn't sure I was prepared for. But when I woke up, there was no turning back. I had prepared, I had fought, and now all I could do was stand and let the truth speak for itself. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that courthouse weeks ago, uncertain of myself. Now, I knew what I had to do. I put on my gray suit, the one I'd bought months ago, and stood in front of the mirror, taking a moment to steady myself. The face staring back at me wasn't the person who had been afraid to speak out. It was someone who had endured, who had found her strength, and now knew her worth. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. This wasn't about showing my family that I could do it. This was about showing myself that I could. The courthouse felt colder than it had the last time I was there. The walls seemed to close in as I walked through security, each step echoing in my ears, reminding me of the stakes. The room was already filling up as I entered. I noticed my family sitting in their usual spots. The expressions were familiar, the cold, calculating stares, the dismissive glances. They expected me to back down, to crumble under the pressure. but I wasn't going to let them have that satisfaction. I walked to the respondents' table, my feet heavy with every step. My eyes briefly met Logan's in the crowd. He gave me the smallest nod, barely noticeable, but it felt like a lifeline. He wasn't on their side anymore. That much was clear. Maybe, just maybe, he understood. The judge entered the room, her presence commanding immediate silence. As she took her seat at the bench, I could feel the tension in the air. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. The judge turned to Roger Finch first. "Mr. Finch," she said, "please present your case." Roger stood, his usual confidence shaken. He introduced himself smoothly, but his voice lacked the self-assurance he'd carried earlier. He made his arguments, citing the supposed incapacity that ran through the documents my family had submitted. But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I knew what I had to do. When it was my turn, I stood without hesitation. The judge nodded toward me. "Miss Bennett, you may present your case." The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. I glanced at my binder, the same one that had grown thicker with each new piece of evidence I uncovered. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and began. "Your Honor, I have here the evidence that shows the fraud my family has committed. These are forged psychiatric evaluations, bank records with unauthorized withdrawals, and email threads where they discuss their plan to take control of the trust." I could hear the gasps from my family. I didn't look at them. I kept my focus on the judge, keeping my voice steady as I laid everything out. Each piece of evidence I presented was another nail in the coffin for their case. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, it was all there, laid bare for the world to see. I opened each document carefully, taking my time to explain the significance of every piece of evidence. As I spoke, I could feel a sense of power building inside me. This wasn't just about the money. It was about standing up to them. Standing up for the person I was. For the person I had always been. I had been overlooked and underestimated for too long, but not anymore. Roger Finch tried to interrupt a couple of times, but the judge silenced him with a single wave of her hand. She listened carefully, her sharp eyes never leaving me. As I finished, I closed the binder, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't done yet, but I had done everything I could. Now, I just had to wait. The judge sat in silence for a long moment, flipping through the documents, letting the weight of the evidence sink in. The tension in the room grew, heavy and thick, as everyone waited for her to speak. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Finch, do your clients have any explanation for these forged documents and the unauthorized withdrawals from Mr. Brooks' account?" Roger opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked back at my family, who were all now staring at the ground. There was no defense, no excuse. There was nothing they could say to undo what had been done. The judge turned to my family. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Mitchell, do any of you have an explanation for these actions?" They didn't answer. None of them spoke. My mother's face was pale, her lips trembling. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might break. Kendall's expression was blank, her usual smirk gone. The judge looked down at the papers in front of her, taking another moment to digest the evidence. Finally, she spoke again. "By the express terms of the interarm clause, in the Eugene Brooks Irrevocable Trust, the petitioners have forfeited all beneficial interest. The petition for guardianship is denied and dismissed with prejudice. All trust assets remain solely with Miss Bennett. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it wasn't as I expected. It wasn't a triumphant cheer. It was quiet. Final. Earned. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, and the room fell into silence. I gathered my things slowly, my hands steady, even though my heart was racing. The hardest part was over. My family's betrayal had been laid bare, and the judge had ruled in my favor. I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of everything I had carried for so long lifting just a little. I didn't look back at my family as I left. There was nothing left to say. The sun was low in the sky as I stepped outside. The cold Montana air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. Justice had been served. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. The next few weeks were filled with the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened. My family's downfall came quickly. The foreclosure notices, the divorce papers, the financial ruin, it all came crashing down on them. But I couldn't bring myself to feel any satisfaction in it. The victory felt hollow, tainted by the family I had lost in the process. In the end, the trust was mine. And Grandpa's legacy was safe, just as he had wanted. I used the money to establish the Eugene Brooks Neurodiversity Foundation, helping others like me, people who had been underestimated, people who had been told they couldn't. I started a new life, a life where I didn't have to hide or shrink back. The first 5 recipients of the scholarships were already enrolled in community college, working toward careers in accounting and finance. I was proud of what I had built, even if it didn't feel like the victory I had imagined. I bought a small house in town, a modest 2-bedroom craftsman with blue siding and a wraparound porch. The day I closed on it, I hung Grandpa's old ledger on the wall above my new desk. I had finally created something of my own, something that mattered. Mom sent me one last email a few weeks after the hearing. Hadley, your father and I were wrong. We let fear and greed get the best of us. I know I don't deserve it. But if there's any way you could find it in your heart to forgive me, we'll make this right. I read it twice, but I didn't reply. I just dragged the message to the trash, emptying the folder right after. Logan's last message came on a Thursday night. It was a photo, just a picture of Grandpa and me, when I was 12, sitting on the tailgate of Grandpa's truck. Grandpa was grinning, leaning against the old Ford, and I was holding the ledger like it was made of gold. Underneath, it was a simple message. I'm sorry, sis. I saved the picture to my phone. I stared at it for exactly 30 seconds, then set it as my lock screen. Then I blocked the number. I didn't hate them. Hate took too much energy, and I didn't have any left to spare. But forgiveness wasn't owed. It was a gift. And they had used up every single chance I'd given them. Some mornings, I drive out to the ranch Grandpa left me. I still own it, leased to a young couple, who send me reports and perfect rent checks. I walk the same fence lines Grandpa taught me to read. Feel the wind that used to whip through his white hair, and I know exactly what he'd say if he could see me now. He'd tip his hat, grin, and tell me, "You did good." And that was enough.